Hello and welcome to Bangalore International Centre's very own podcast, BIC Talks. Bangalore International Centre is a platform for informed conversations, exchange of ideas, and a space for arts and culture. BIC Talks brings the essence of all that the physical space stands for and more to your doorstep.
Are there limits to the Indian concept of Dharma? How can individuals set their moral compass, and how does the Valmiki Ramayana explore this? Arshia Sattar's latest book is called Maryada, Searching for Dharma in the Ramayana. Journalist and critic Somak Ghoshal talks to Arshia about the book. This episode of BIC Talks is an edited version of a BIC Streams event that was live on October 31st. If you like the conversation and want to attend future conversations live, head on over to bangaloreinternationalcentre.org and sign up for the email newsletter. With that, over to Somak and Arshia.
I'm absolutely thrilled to be speaking to Arshia about a new book. And like all her previous writing on Ramayana, this book also makes us very deeply alert to the text. And I'm very grateful for her to teaching me read Ramayana closely with new interest and curiosity each time. This one, as all of you know, the title is Maryada, and I want to actually begin with the title itself, because Maryada, from what we understand now, etymologically, has become a very different word, become tied to respect, honor, all those concepts. But in the original Sanskrit version, as Arshia writes, it is tied to the idea of boundaries. And as the title of the talk and the book says, it is about the limits and boundaries of Dharma. So Arshia, I would like to start with asking you to explain a little bit about this evolution, how Maryada has come to become what it has in the contemporary non-Sanskritized usage. And what does it mean in the original text?
Well, first of all, Somak, I'm so happy to be talking to you, of all people. And thank you for always very, very carefully reading my work. And as I've said to you many, many times, you are my ideal reader. Sometimes I think of you when I'm writing. So I could not have asked for a better interlocutor. And this is my first talk about Maryada, so I'm a bit nervous. Partly because it's a difficult book. It doesn't have the sort of, the love storyness of lost loves, and it doesn't have the shock value of Uttara. Uttara is a very simple book because the Uttara Kanda is a very simple Kanda, but Dharma is Sukshma, and I had never intended to write a book about Dharma, but it just turned out that way. Maryada is also a title that Rahul, my editor, and I came to quite late. And my agent, who, God bless her, tries to sell my books in America, was like, this is never going to work. And it's like, if it ever gets to America, we can find a different title. But as you pointed out, the word Maryada in India is a very heavy word. It's a word that everybody understands. It's a word that not everybody likes, but it is a very, very big word. I'm also surprised from conversations with friends and emails how much this title is resonating at this moment. But of course, who knew that this was going to happen? I mean, the book was supposed to be out in April, and for various and obvious reasons, it got postponed. And I'm grateful to HarperCollins that they decided that they wanted to release it as a book, not as an ebook first, right? So in a way, I've not had to think about the word Maryada until very, very recently. The title of the book comes from Maryada Purushottama, which is what Rama is increasingly called in the later Ramayana tradition. Maryada is actually a boundary, right? And because all the characters in the book, I look at the characters in the Ramayana in terms of what their dharmic choices are and what can be the limits of their goodness. So I had chosen the title very much from there. But wanting, of course, Indian readers to immediately have the resonance of Maryada Purushottama, I think the word Maryada, that the way it's now used, comes very, very much from a Hindi context, the way the word is used in Hindi. And that I think we must attribute to Tulsidasa, because he really, really pushes the idea of Rama as the Maryada Purushottama and the embodiment of Dharma. Whereas, of course, in Valmiki, that it's not quite so clearly enunciated. Oh, by the way, today is Valmiki Jayanti.
Yes. Yes. So it's a very auspicious day for us to have this conversation.
And it's a very, very good time to remember Valmiki and to remind ourselves that the story, the Ramayana that he wrote, is actually very, very different from the ones that we receive in our in the languages that are closer to us, our mother tongues, sometimes our father tongues, sometimes television tongues, sometimes Amish tongue, sometimes Devadatta tongue. There are many tongues for Ramayana, which is great. But Valmiki is really quite distinct. So, in fact, in the Valmiki text, it's Narada, which is really interesting. Narada, who introduces Valmiki to the idea that Rama is the perfect man and that he is the Maryada purushottama, and his story deserves to be told by Valmiki in this new meter that he's just invented. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not comfortable talking about how the word Maryada has developed into the word that we understand it to be right now, because honestly, I hadn't thought about it when Rahul and I came up with this title. But in our minds, both Rahul's and mine, it pertains very, very much to not simply Rama's Maryada in the book, but the Maryada that everybody else finds for their own actions, whether it's Dasharatha or Kaikeyi or Lakshmana, even Ravana, right? Because the Valmiki text says more than once that, when Hanuman is in Sundarakanda, when he's in Lanka and he sees Ravana's rather extensive harem, and he says the most beautiful women of all creatures were there, Naga women, everything. And they had all come there of their free will. Only Sita had not. So we forget that even Ravana has a Maryada. He has a boundary. Of transgression. In a way, the title Maryada points to not the acts that are contained by righteousness, but the acts that are actually transgressive of it. Yeah, so that's why boundary becomes an important way for us, not simply to think about Dharma, but to understand the actions of characters in the text, and I think our own actions as well, because whatever you say about Ramayana, and I've learned this now after 30 years and many books, whatever we say about Ramayana, we're actually saying about ourselves.
Yes. Absolutely. Especially for a nation like ours, which is obsessed with Ramayana and the figure of Ram, increasingly so in the times we live in. I think this book is very, very important and vital for us to go back to our understanding of who this figure was, what he stood for, and also to look at Valmiki closely, because he's kind of the Ramayana storyteller. The others have sort of followed him. Yeah, so I was saying that in your books very closely, I also think that he's psychologically the most complex.
And of course, he's not real. I mean, he's the only author of the Ramayana that we cannot say, on his birthday even, we cannot say that we have any historical evidence for the existence of a flesh and blood Valmiki. And to my mind, the fact that he might actually be a literary character himself makes him all the more interesting and all the more worthy of attention. But I also wanted to thank you for your very lovely review this morning, which was in Mint Lounge. It sort of skirts around these questions too, that what has Rama become in the 2,500 years that we have known him? I think the most critical change, and to me the most unfortunate change, came in the mid-1980s with the preparation for Advani's Rath Yatra, where to sanctify that journey and to give it all the mythological gravitas that Advani wanted it to have, they had to create a Rama who was a warrior. And he was a warrior against injustice. Actually, he wasn't. He was a warrior against outsiders. And certainly people my age and your age too will remember those pictures from the 1980s, from 1985, 86 onwards, where Rama is standing with, his bow and arrow stretched and he's blue and his hair is flying in the wind. And it's a very, very martial image. And that was what Hindutva needed in the 1980s to establish itself as a movement that would purge the country of outsiders, interlopers, illegal immigrants, pretenders to citizenship and all that. But Rama is not that character at all, not even in Ramcharitmanas. And Hindutva's idea of Ramayana and all that is quite singular. It is Tulsi. But even in Tulsi, Rama is not a warrior. It's Lakshmana who's the warrior. Just like Yudhishthira is not a great warrior in Mahabharata. Arjuna is the warrior. And that's a whole nother discussion. And it's something I'm getting increasingly fascinated the king who doesn't want to be king, the king who is attracted to non-violence rather than to the martial aesthetic and to the Dharma of a Kshatriya. So Rama, in Kamba Ramayana, for example, he's a great romantic. It's a very, very romantic version of the story. In Tulsi, of course, the text is drenched in bhakti and in the love for this particular god. But Valmiki's Ramayana, Valmiki's Rama is a very circumspect person. He's one of the reasons why so many of us metropolitan, modern 20th and 21st century Indians find Rama hard to deal with is because we find him opaque. He's not giving us anything. He's not getting angry. He's not, but he is. All these things happen, but they're so small in a much more complex story that we forget that he's the quiet guy. Thinks before he acts. Even in the battle with Ravana, he always has people surrounding him, as does Yudhishthira, because that's not where he excels. That's not where his greatness lies. That's not his prowess. It's not an unexpected interpretation given the politics that's around Hindutva, but I think it's an unfortunate. It takes away so much of what is interesting about Rama. And, even for younger readers, for modern people, I hate to do this, but one way to think about Rama, he is your quintessential 21st century metrosexual male. The guy who's got the soft side, the guy who thinks about things, who does not naturally inhabit all these words we use like toxic masculinity. He's none of those things. The fact that he does bad things and that he has a moment of great injustice towards his wife is different from, the
other aspects of his character.
Yeah.
It also brings us to a very interesting conundrum with this idea of the Kshatriya and the caste markers of the Kshatriya. And there is a very powerful passage in your analysis where Rama is actually upbraiding Lakshmana for acting like a headstrong Kshatriya and, resorting to violence at the drop of a hat. Would you think that Valmiki was actually subtly kind of playing with these ideas of caste behavior as well by projecting Rama?
I think both the epics. I think one of the things that the epics are trying to figure out is precisely the power dynamic between the Brahmin and the Kshatriya, between the caste, the elite that holds spiritual power and the elite that maintains temporal power. And, the epics are all about that. Look at Mahabharata. There are Brahmins who behave like Kshatriyas, there are Kshatriyas who behave like Brahmins. The two leading brothers in both epic, Yudhishthira and Arjuna in one, and of course Rama and Lakshmana in the other, embody different aspects of what it means to be the boss of society, really. Rama and Yudhishthira, of course, are born Kshatriyas, but they are very, very attracted to the quietude of the sages that they meet in the forest. They love these philosophical discussions. Rama changes completely in Uttarakanda. In Uttarakanda, he's surrounded by completely different Brahmins. In the early part of the text, Dasharatha's family priest, court priest, was Vasishtha, who's a gentle, gentle creature. We know Vasishtha mainly through Vishwamitra's ongoing rivalry with Vasishtha. Vasishtha's like, whatever, he's just minding his cows. But in Uttarakanda, Agastya takes over. He takes over the court. And he's a very, very different kind of Brahmin. He's a very aggressive Brahmin. And he Brahmanizes Rama in a way. And nothing tells us that more than the Shambhuka story, where the Brahmin arrives with his dead son and what Rama has to do. But, I think one of the reasons this was why the epics are so focused on this sort of social rivalry is, remember when they were being composed, they're being composed within 100 years of the death of the historical Buddha. Mahavira has just lived and died. And these are princes who have renounced, right? The Upanishads are being written. We're moving away from the Brahmin dominance of the Vedas. The later Vedas in particular, the later Vedic age, the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, the later Upanishads are being composed at the same time that the epics are being composed. And Upanishads also, we have kings who are the holders of wisdom. Janaka is the one that comes most immediately to mind, Ajatashatru. So there is this social tension already in the environment that produced the epics, the social tension between the priestly elite and the warrior elite. So I think there is an examination of the destiny of a warrior, or as you say, the caste behavior of a warrior, and perhaps no more powerfully reflected than in the Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna says, I can't do this. And Krishna says, you're a warrior. You were born for this. You were brought up for this. You cannot say you're not going to do this, right? So even Arjuna, the greatest warrior in all of the epics, has his moment of like, I can't do this, man. I just can't. And I find that deeply, deeply moving. That these men who have been taught all their lives that they are to fight, that they are to kill, when they actually have to do it, they can't.
Exactly. I think the tension is very potent in the Ramayana and in Mahabharata, of course, between, as you write very sort of beautifully, the progress from the city to the forest. And once we step beyond the boundaries of the urban, metropolitan Ayodhya kind of, statecraft, we see a very different idea of dharma and right behavior playing out in the forests. And also this concept of this caste-bending behavior, as you were saying, that Brahmins behave like Kshatriyas, they're sort of the trainers of the princess. This happens quite potently inside the forests. And I would like to sort of tell us a little about the forest as a liminal space that you keep talking about. It's a metaphorical space, it's a social space, it's a psychological space to an extent. What is the forest in the Ramayana?
Well, first of all, it's not my bright idea that the forest is a liminal space, sadly. I wish it were. But it's been sort of most extensively developed by Joseph Campbell. But even before that, epics, we call them epics, and we liken them. Well, we don't necessarily liken them, but we think of them in the same breath as we would other stories from other parts of the world, because the epic is a genre. It conforms to a certain formal structure, it conforms to a certain narrative trajectory. And one of the ways we have of classifying epic is precisely by the fact that the hero leaves his city and goes to the forest, right? So whether it's Gilgamesh or whether it's Odysseus or whether it's Rama or Yudhishthira, Beowulf, the journey to the forest is a very, very important journey, not simply in terms of narrative, because that's where all the adventures are, that's where they meet magical creatures, that's where they make friends and allies, and that's how they win their princesses back. Of course, there is all of that. But the forest is also the place that changes the hero. So one of the ways that I like to think about it is, Rama and Yudhishthira also, and Gilgamesh for sure, they are the men who should be king. Right? Because they are the first in line, or, whatever complicated narrative justifications there are for that. But when they come back after their exile or their journey in the forest, they truly are the man who will be king. He deserves now to be king.
He's earned it.
Yeah, he has earned it. And because he has had that time for self-reflection, he has seen there are other ways to be. Of course, there are the Rakshasas, but most importantly in epics, there are the sages, right? And all the sages, whether they're talking to Yudhishthira or to Rama, they all emphasize the importance of circumspection. Yeah, they all say, think, listen, talk, surround yourselves with wise people, men, but, I'd love to say people, but I can't. And surround yourself with wise men, listen to what they're saying, all of that. So in that sense, the forest is a very important stepping stone along that journey. But in terms of its liminality, limin is a threshold. So a liminal space is something that is between two more defined spaces. And the forest is a space of fluidity, of not definition, and for me, when I started work on Ramayana, which was a long time ago, but I started with Hanuman. And Hanuman to me embodies that liminality so profoundly, right? Because the charisma of Hanuman lies in the fact that he's just like us, but he isn't.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when I think, I want to be Hanuman, why do I want to be Hanuman? Because he can fly and speak Sanskrit, both things that I would really, really like to do, with the facility that he is able to do them. So forests are inhabited by creatures that are not like us, right? Whether it's Shurpanakha or even the sages and the other Rakshasas and Gandharvas, and you can meet anything really in a forest, right?
Right.
And it's when you meet those creatures that are not like you that you look at yourself, even like, so many of us have had the opportunity to travel and to live in foreign cultures. And for me, the greatest gift of all the years I spent in America was realizing that what we do in India is neither natural nor normal. It is constructed, as is an American reality or reality in Ethiopia or Japan or anywhere, right? So that's also what happens to our human heroes, or our God-endowed human heroes, divinity-endowed human heroes. And when they go to the forest, they're like, oh, wow, man, no, everybody's not like me. And the lesson of the forest is what Sita tries to tell Rama. She says, This is not the place to be a Kshatriya. You can be a Kshatriya when you go back to Ayodhya. But right now, right here, put down your weapon. Yeah? Neither Rama nor Lakshmana actually takes a they listen, and then they say, yeah, okay, thanks. And then proceed to live exactly as they had, with absolutely devastating consequences, of course. So.
Yeah. I was coming to that, actually. The forest also presents this moment of crisis in the Ramayana, as we see towards the beginning when Dasharatha has to make the promise to Kaikeyi. The forest also presents that situation where Sita is attracted by the golden deer and asks Ram to go and fetch it. And then Lakshmana is sent after Ram because he's not coming back. So before he leaves, he draws a boundary, like a Maryada, as you were talking about, like a literal boundary around her, and leaves her there. So I was very fascinated by this moment because various conceptions of Dharma seem to come and intersect at this point. Ram's Dharma, Sita's Dharma, Lakshmana's Dharma. What do you make of this very critical juncture in the narrative?
That's a great question. Of course, the problem is that in Valmiki, there is no Lakshman Rekha. Lakshmana does not draw any circle around Sita. He just tells her, listen, be careful. And he says to the deities of the forest, protect her while I'm gone. But as you're absolutely right, there are so many boundaries that are transgressed. In that moment, why does Lakshmana leave, right?
Yes.
Because he says to Sita, she says the most horrible, horrible thing to him. She says, you're not going because you want your brother to die, because you want me. Now, that is the most transgressive thing that she could have said, right? Partly because of who she is. She's a very good woman. Lakshmana is, of course, as you know, my favorite, most noble human being in Ramayana. But she is speaking as a sister-in-law to a brother-in-law. Yeah, this is that Sali Devar problem, right? It's
in Bali and Sugriva as well, as you write later.
Absolutely. It is the same thing with Bali and Sugriva. It is the unthinkable, because she's suggesting that it's incestuous. She's your older brother's wife, is not your sister. She's for you. I mean, she finds you the woman you're going to marry. She trains that woman. It's a very, very maternal role. So that is a terrible, terrible transgression. Previous to that, when they first see the deer, and Sita's just fascinated, and she says, I want it. And she says to Rama, I want it dead or alive. Right? If it's alive, we can take it back to Ayodhya as a pet and everybody will envy us. And if it's dead, the skin will be so soft to sit upon, right? So Sita in that moment is not herself. She's utterly bewitched. Power of that deer turns everybody's head, right? And Rama goes after it, and he has this really peculiar argument. Lakshmana says, don't go, it's a Rakshasa. I say, hey, if it's a Rakshasa, I'll kill it and come back. No? And if it's a deer, I'll bring it for Sita. Right? So again, this could not happen in the city. This can only happen in the forest, where the one thing you can expect is the unexpected. And, and the other thing, of course, plays out in some other way with Vali and Sugriva as well, the transgressive relationship with the sister-in-law, except that among the Vanaras, among the monkeys, that is allowed. You are allowed to take your brother's wife, as in many Indian cultures, levirate marriage is not simply sanctioned, it's encouraged, especially in cultures where men have to leave home to work. Anyway, that's for sociologists and anthropologists and all that. The thing of the deer, the thing of being enchanted, the thing of actually losing oneself, of not knowing who one. If you don't know who you are, you don't know what your boundary is, right? Particularly in a Hindu universe, because within a Hindu universe, your behavior, your dharma, is entirely circumscribed by who you are. Right? Whether you're a Brahmin or a Kshatriya or a Shudra or you're a man or a woman, if you're a wife or a sister or a daughter, yeah. But if that has been taken away from you, that Maryada has become blurred or invisible, then how do you know? You cannot know the right thing. But, once you're back in the city, those boundaries are very quickly redrawn and very quickly established, and you recognize them very, very quickly. It's in the forest. It's like you can't see the forest for the trees. I mean, that's really the metaphor of Maryada in the liminal space. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm going to read out one sentence which I found very fascinating. where you write that Dharma presents individuals with more than one and equal legitimate choice. And that becomes to me the crux of the whole problem.
Yes, it is.
And also gives Dharma its various shades. Like there is a Rakshasa Dharma, which we don't acknowledge because we are coming from a very dominant culture point of view into Ramayana. Because Surpanakha says, as you write, that I'm law unto myself. I don't care about other men's laws, other people's laws. I am my Dharma. And the same thing Ram is actually telling us, like his sort of caste brethren, that I am Dharma himself.
Yeah.
What does Dharma become? You mentioned the word Sukshma, and I wanted you to dwell on this word a little more and tell us, what does this Sukshma and Dharma's connotation in this context become in Ramayana?
Man, we've been thinking about this as a culture for 2,500 years. I mean, I would not dare to answer this question. But again, and I think I say it somewhere in the book, I think with Dharma, really, the questions we ask are more important than the answers we get, right? Because if we ask questions, then first of all, we're actively engaged with the idea of what it is to be right and good, rather than, oh, my mommy told me, or, my teacher said, or whatever. No, that is critical for us as human beings, to constantly ask, not to sort of just, receive without thinking. And, an unreconstructed Dharma can be a terrible thing. Okay, so many of us, and myself included, believe that in the Hindu universe in particular, the self is not an individual. It's always a relational self, right? That of course I'm Arshia, but that does not complete me or actually define me in any way. I'm Arshia, who is a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a teacher, a housewife, whatever. There are 100 relational aspects to my being in this life. Right? So therefore, let's take the easiest one. Let's take Dasharatha, for example, right? He is a king, of course. And as a king, he has to announce his heir. He has to secure the future of his dynasty. He has to secure his kingdom. And so righteously, absolutely, he passes the kingdom on to his eldest son, who is the eldest son of his eldest wife, his first wife. So Rama is most appropriate in terms of primogeniture, but he's also the best of all the guys. I mean, he's most mature, he's all of those things. So Rama is the right person in every way. So Dasharatha has fulfilled his duty as the king of Kosala, right, as the Ikshvaku ruler of the kingdom. But then, in quite an unexpected, I guess it is unexpected, he's confronted by the wife that he loves best, who says, well, no, I want my son to be king. And that's when Dasharatha has a choice, because he does have duties and obligations as a husband. And he had promised Kaikeyi, when they were younger, he would give her 2 boons and she could claim them whenever she wanted. She said, no, I don't need, I have everything right now, but I will claim them. And he says, oh, yes, you must claim them. And so she does. And so he's bound by his word to accede to her demands, right? So here is Dasharatha with 2 equally legitimate dharmic choices, right? He chooses to honor his obligations as a husband. And that necessarily means that he will be transgressing his dharma as a king. Now, the same thing happens to Rama at the end of the story, when he has to choose between being the king of Ayodhya, banishing his wife, who his citizens are gossiping about, or being true his husbandly commitments and saying, no, citizens, I mean, I trust my wife, I love her, she's fine, I'm not going to do anything, right? And of course, he makes the opposite choice. He chooses to be the king rather than the husband. Now, why he does all of this, that is in Lost Loves. That's in, that book.
Yes, that's a different book.
But he too has to make these choices. So in a way, I mean, these choices, look at Arjuna in Mahabharata, right? Because it is his duty as a warrior to kill his teachers, his elders, his uncles, right? His grandfathers. But as a human being, he can't do it. As a grandson, as a nephew, as a student, how can he kill Drona? How can he kill Bhishma? And he makes a choice too. He's persuaded by God, no less, to make the choice that is appropriate for his caste position and his position in society. which in a way Rama does too, right? And Dasharatha, who we also, what an old fool, and all, he's the one that, modern people will respect because he chooses love over duty. That's what we think our individual lives are made meaningful by the fact that we choose not out of social obligation, but out of existential truth, we like to believe.
No, I was just thinking that, it also kind of posits this idea that Dharma sort of is tied to your sense of self, and there is a higher self which must serve the higher principle, the noble principles of life. And there's a sort of baser self slightly, which is kind of responding to these feelings, of love, of affection, of lust, infatuation. And Dasaratha, in that sense, is sort of a failure, isn't he? Like he cannot really hold himself up to that higher dharma as a king.
He's an old man. He's done. I have grown old under the umbrella of kingship. I have performed my duty valiantly. I am tired. Let me go. This is what he says, right? When he announces that Rama is going to succeed him. So now here's the thing. The decision that Dasharatha makes is not appropriate for that ashrama in his life. He's still in Grihastha. If he was in Vanaprastha or in Sannyasa or something like that, he would have possibly had not simply a different set of choices, but we would have seen him differently from making the choice that he did. But because he is still a king, because he is reigning, we expect that he should have made the choice for his people and his son rather than the choice for his wife. So Dasharatha's behavior is not appropriate to his age in life, no? And also we think, you're such an old man. You can't be giving in to your beautiful young wife, no? Have some, there's all that comes with it. But he is actually, let's look at Kaikeyi also, we are so...
Exactly, I was coming to that this notion of Maryada, is it a very gendered notion then? Like, what are we looking at? The men are held up to these standards and the women are sort of always kind of blamed and upbraided for whatever...
Oh yeah. And that is also, that happens in the forest, that, even city dharmas are all located there in the bodies of women. What has Kaikeyi done that is so wrong? She's looking out for her son. We expect our mothers to do that, but somehow when Kaikeyi it's a terrible thing. No, but if, again, in our contemporary world, we judge women as good or bad mothers, depending on how much they look out for their children. And Kaikeyi, again, she has her duty as a queen, which is to just say, I'm so happy that Rama it's appropriate, he's the eldest son, he's the best son. She's very fond of Rama. In fact, she's sort of very, very pleased with all the coronation business and that Rama's going to be king. And it's Mantara, of course, another woman, and a misshapen woman at that, a hunchback, chabies her and says, "You fool, nobody will give you any respect. You'll be forgotten. You'll be cast beyond you'll have no power. Kaushalya will rule." She's young enough or ambitious enough or susceptible enough to be completely persuaded. But she's persuaded by the rightness of her duty towards her son, her duty as a mother. Yes. And of course, one of the reasons why epics are so endlessly fascinating. Because if there are problems like this, right? If we are in a position where suddenly we're judging Dasharatha for doing the wrong thing, or we're judging Kaikeyi for doing the right thing, some story comes up, right? Some story that happened long ago, right? And of course we realize, it's suggested in various places, not so much in Valmiki, but much, much more in later Ramayana, that when Dasharatha wanted to marry Kaikeyi, her father said, of course you can, so long as her son is king. And we know this happens when older kings want to marry younger women. Look at Shantanu and Matsyakanda, who become Satyavati. It's the same, except in Mahabharata, she says, "I will marry you if you let my son be king," right? So that's a normal sort of transaction, conjugal transaction. Then somehow the pressure is off Dasharatha, right? That Kaikeyi had to ask that, right? And so she's an instrument of fate, and of course to justify Dasharatha's actions for agreeing and sending Rama into the forest, we have the most amazing story about Shravana.
Yes.
He's hunting in the forest and he kills this guy, and the guy's father curses him and says, "You too will die of grief, separated from your best beloved son." Now that is karma coming from somewhere, right? To sort of clear or in fact muddy the waters of Dharma. No? So it's impossible to think of one without the other, Dharma and Karma. And I think that the epics do it best. They really do, because they take on the narrative power of these philosophical ideas, right? And I mean, look at these stories. Look at Ramayana and Mahabharata. I cannot think of stories that are more compelling in terms of adventure, in terms of philosophy, in terms of morality, in terms of love and death and all. I mean, really.
Absolutely. I'm also quite fascinated by, I want to talk about Lakshmana in detail because you have the most beautiful chapter on him. The most heartfelt chapter in the book is about Lakshmana. But also Bharata, who actually says that I would have killed my mother if it were not against my dharma for doing what she did. And this whole idea of matricide really disturbed me, that, as a king, you can, or whatever, prince, you can so easily say that I would kill my own mother to uphold my father's choice and my brother's right to the throne. So, and also Lakshmana's rage.
Well, it's your fairly standard misogyny. That's one way to think about it. But yes, this is the thing, Somak, that it's so important to read these texts for ourselves, because when we read them for others, we'll notice these things, and we're so used to being told the story, right? And typically we are told these stories by older women in our families, right? Who have a stake in the status quo, in a perpetuation of conservative models of behavior and, all that. So, if you hadn't read Ramayana as carefully as you have, you would not even have noticed that Bharata says this, and curses her. He says, go to hell, you blot on the reputation of the Ikshvaku clan. And, what did I do in my past life that I was born as your son? But again, we have a choice of seeing this as you have seen it, as an entirely personal interaction between a mother and a son, right? The other way to look at it is as a prince and his mother, as if they were social entities, not as biologically connected as mother and son. And what is he doing? Yeah? He is saying that one of my choices is to kill you, right? I would not be wrong if I were to do that, because you have shamed me, you have shamed the clan, you have resulted in the death of my father and the banishment of my brother. So he has this whole set of reasons why he can't actually say that, right? But also he's kind of forgetting that he's punishing her for looking out for him.
Yeah.
That whether we're looking at the biological and emotional connection between mothers and sons, or whether we're looking at them as social entities like Bharata, what about this? And that is also, I think, why Bharata needs to be trained to be a king. Of course, when he goes to meet Rama in the forest and he says, take back the kingdom, Rama, no, forget the kingdom. And then he proceeds to give him like about 6 chapters of Raja Dharma. You should do this, you should do that, you should listen to this one, listen to Vasishtha, do like that, get rid of this Jabali. There's a lot that goes on there. So I think it's also a moment of Bharata's immaturity, right? And yet, both he and Shatrughna are away. They are with Bharata's grandfather, with Kaikeyi's father, actually. And they come back and their father has died. And so they perform all the rituals. And then they see Manthara, and Shatrughna, who doesn't do anything in the whole story, decides he's going to beat up Manthara, and he kicks her and all of that. And Bharata stops him and says, don't do this. Rama will be angry with you. Yeah, so Bharata hasn't yet evolved or been led to the point where he is making his own choices about dharma. He's living on dharma principles that are borrowed from those around him. And I think that he is not the hero. He's not going to go to the forest. He's going to sit in Nandam and wait for his brother to come back, right? So he has no narrative trajectory, actually. He has not gone to learn how to be king. It is Rama who has gone. And I would say to some extent Lakshmana as well. But yeah.
I was just coming to that. I remember asking you that Sita is one of the most harvested characters in the Ramayana.
I love that phrase, harvested. Yeah, okay.
Because she's so rife for all sorts of analysis. She can be the vehicle of so many kinds of thoughts and ideas and right and wrong and all of that. But to me, after reading your book, I feel that Lakshmana is as potent a character for that, because he also disobeys Rama and follows him into the forest, like Sita does. And at various points in the narrative, he actually questions him constantly. He's kind of the moral foil to him.
Yes.
And I want to ask you about Lakshmana and your relationship with this character that you've written so beautifully in this book. I mean, it's one of the most passionate chapters, I thought.
Yeah. Did you not like Lakshmana before you read this book? Did you not ever give him a second glance?
So I have always judged him for abandoning Urmila. And Urmila is this silent, voiceless woman in the narrative again. We don't know what happened to her. But then I realized on reading this that Urmila's sort of provenance is also quite complicated. She comes in much later in various retellings and all of that. So, but yeah, I would like to hear what you think.
There's a purity to Lakshmana in Valmiki because there is no Urmila. So we can love him unabashedly and we can admire him without having to say but. We can always say and for Lakshmana in a way that actually we can't even for Rama. That I sat on that chapter for years and years and years, not on that chapter necessarily, but on that thought. It took me a long, long time to develop the courage of my conviction about who this guy really was and how he dies and why he does all the things that he does. You're right, that he is the one who, as you said, disobeys Rama's orders, as does Sita, and they both go with him to the forest. Rama is supposed to go alone. And then consistently through the book, he's challenging him. Sometimes he's asking him, what is the Dharma you're following, right? When Rama comes to tell Kaushalya, his mother, that he's been ordered to go into the forest, Lakshmana is like, what is this rubbish? What are you talking about? You don't have to do this. And then Rama says, no, I must. He says, what is this? You're talking like a weak man. You're talking like a coward. The dharma that you follow is the dharma of cowardice. And Rama says, the dharma that you follow is the dharma of the violent and the base, right? So they have started out with this conversation about dharma, and they come at it very differently, and they live it very differently. And from reading the book, that I believe that Lakshmana's dharma is predicated on justice, whereas Rama's dharma is predicated on righteousness, right? And because the story is what it is, because the story has to do what it has to do, Rama's dharma is the one that is celebrated. But for somebody like myself, and given the world that we live in, I find Lakshmana's interpretation, what he sees as being the right thing to do, I find that much more compelling. It can be pretty outrageous, like it is right in the beginning where he says, we should imprison our father, he's old, he's senile, he doesn't know what he's doing, right? But he cannot do this. And he says to Rama, you do it, I'll be standing right by you. Or in the forest where he says, when they see Bharata coming, Bharata comes with this enormous entourage, right? He comes with his army and he comes with the whole court of Ayodhya and the mummies and, everybody. And Rama's like, oh, how nice, Bharata's come to see me. And Lakshmana is like, don't be an idiot. He's come with his army, right? He has come to kill you. And Rama is like, no, I trust him, right? But Lakshmana, he's not right about Bharata, but he sees things for what they are. He's not as trusting, perhaps, as Rama is. Rama believes that everybody is as good as he is. And Lakshmana is like, no, guy, everybody is not as good as you are. People are difficult and you need to take that in. And then, of course, the great irony is that for Lakshmana, the person who becomes the most difficult of all to deal with is his beloved brother, the Maryada Purushottama, the embodiment of Dharma.
I think he's very practical minded, as you were saying, Lakshmana. Like he has a very strong sense of reality and he's rooted to present dangers in the forest.
Absolutely. Here's the thing, that there are always very simple, easy explanations for narrative moments, right? That, okay, why do we have Lakshmana and Rama together? Because Rama needs a foil, right? We will only understand Rama better because Lakshmana exists. Because they are so different. We say, oh, look at Rama, he never loses his temper. Oh, look at Rama, he is so compassionate. Yeah, because Lakshmana is not all of those things. Sure. There is another sort of very standard literary explanation that they're a composite hero, right?
Yeah.
That together they form the central character. It's not Lakshmana, it's not Rama alone, but it is their
unity almost.
Thank you. Exactly. Not their companionship, but their unity. Fine. Those are necessary reasons. Yeah, there might even be contingent reasons to understand these characters like this. But isn't it so much more exciting to understand characters, to push ourselves to understand characters more differently, to see that what is actually happening here is not simply a literary moment where you have two characters or the alter ego. No, what we are seeing here is actually a debate about what Dharma is, right? And it's placed narratively in Ramayana. In Mahabharata, my God, I mean, we have debates about Dharma and debates about Dharma and debates. The samvadas go on and on and on. And it's really hard to read. And first of all, you have to read it in Sanskrit. Then you have to understand it in English. Then you have to appropriate. In Ramayana, it is right there. What do you think is right? Is it justice or is it
righteousness? Maybe.
Righteousness, yeah, really. And I cannot imagine a more pertinent question, even for our times, yeah?
Yes. Especially from our times, the postmodern consciousness from which we are reading this text.
Yes.
We are constantly confronted with this conundrum that whether we should act justly or whether we should act righteously, so that people think that we are doing the right, or should we do the thing that we think is the right thing, which Lakshmana embodies to an extent.
And it involves issues like violence and non-violence, patriarchies, hierarchies, hegemonies. What do you do with women? What do you do with marginalized people? All of this constellation of issues of modernity and post-modernity are actually located in that fundamental debate. Do you want to be just or do you want to be right? I know I want to be right.
Yeah.
And so does Lakshmana, actually. So
I think that's the thing, that sense of self-aggrandizement is not there in him. He doesn't want to be perceived as this great hero.
Yeah,
and in Rama's case, it's the epic heroic quality that kind of overshadows everything else.
Yeah, but we know, you and I especially from reading Lost Loves, that Rama is trapped, right, in the expectations that people have of him, of how he's located. He is the eldest son of the eldest son. This horrible thing has just sort of unfolded around him. His father has made the wrong decision. He's been in the forest. His wife has been kidnapped. Stepmother has been vilified. He's killed a monster. He's chosen the wrong allies. Sugriva is a jerk. He should have chosen Bali. So many. He's absolutely and utterly trapped, and still he tries to be noble. He tries to do the right thing. That's kind of remarkable, right? We disagree with everything that he does, but the fact that his motivation, goodness, righteousness, not wickedness and evil. That's what we're led to believe, that is the difference between Rama and Ravana, right? That Rama is motivated by wanting to be good and Ravana is motivated by not caring.
Yes, absolutely. Honestly speaking, as a reader, as an admirer of your work, I would love to read a book on Ravana from you.
Actually, it's funny. I don't know if I told you this before already, but I realized halfway through writing, when I realized this book was going to be about Dharma, I realized that I've written about Kama, which is lost loves, and I've written about Artha, which is Uttara, because it's about the negotiation of power and wealth and social status and all that. This is the book about Dharma. So now all I have to do is write a book about moksha. Right? But there's no moksha in Valmiki, or it's underdeveloped because bhakti is underdeveloped. But the only person who represents the possibility of moksha in Valmiki Ramayana is Ravana. So if I do write the moksha book, then I'll dedicate it to you for sure. And write about Ravana. Yeah.
Since I want to ask you one last kind of concluding question is, you've written so much about the Ramayana, you've translated it yourself. Does the text still open up new possibilities before you when you read it?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I'm going through a sort of moment of panic, actually, because I think now I've got nothing left to say about Ramayana, and I'm at the ripe old age of 60. I'm now jobless. Right?
Ravana still.
But there is the whole of the Mahabharata waiting for me. But I realize now, I think because in some way, because normally what used to happen, even while I was writing one Ramayana book, by the time I'd finished it, I had seen the next book coming, right? And with Maryada, I can't see the next book as clearly as I could before. So in a way, it's freed me to read Ramayana again. Because otherwise, as I was finishing Lost Love, I was like, okay, Uttara is coming. So then I would reread Ramayana with Uttara in mind, right? And now I reread it but now there's nothing. Now maybe I will see it as text qua text, which I haven't done in 30 years. It could be or it could be, which I think is really what's happening, is that Ramayana is now sort of really reminding me that you can't do Ramayana without Mahabharata. You cannot understand Mahabharata without knowing Ramayana, So it's pushing me little in that direction. So yeah, I don't know what the next book is going to be. I really hope there will be a next book. But
I'm sure there will be, and we will be looking forward to that eagerly. And whatever it is, we'll love it, I'm sure. I think your book actually is very much pointing us towards the multiple possibilities of these ideas, like can we believe and also question how morally okay it is to do both, and that is the beauty of this book and beauty of the Ramayana as Valmiki gave us, I think. And I'm so happy to have this conversation with you, Arshia. Thank you so much for this very, very enlightening conversation.
Thank you for listening in till the end. Please share this episode with a friend on social media, WhatsApp, or anywhere else. It would mean the world to us. And in case you're listening via iTunes or Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and a review. Subscribe to BIC Talks on email or your favorite podcast app and don't miss out on future episodes. This episode of BIC Talks has Gaurav Krishna as our sound engineer with support from S. Sarvanaraj and Lekha Naidu. And the accompanying episode artwork was made by Chandni Venkataraman.
Thank you for listening to this episode of BIC Talks. This podcast can be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcenter.org, as well as on any of your favorite podcast platforms. Tune in for new episodes every week, and do subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages to stay informed on our latest updates.